I'm Professor Brooks, Lonnie J. Avi Brooks, and welcome to Communication 4107, Relational Communication in Organizations. And I wanted to introduce you to the concept of framing, because we're going to be looking at the text called Reframing Organizational Behavior or Reframing Organizations by Lee Bowman and Terence Steele. And what they talk about is they introduce the concepts of reframing, which means viewing situations from multiple perspectives. And that's really what's important here. And frames basically are these cognitive lenses of the world that affect what you see and what it means. So affecting what you see and what it means. So a frame is this mental map to read and negotiate a territory. And the better the map, the easier it is to know where you are and get around. So a map of New York won't help in San Francisco, for instance. A frame is a window. It enables you to see some things, but not others. A frame is also a tool. Its effectiveness depends on choosing the right tool and knowing how to use it. So basically, Lee Bowman and Terence Steele propose 4 frames. The first one is called the structural frame. And that is, how an organization is structured. Is it hierarchical? Is it non-hierarchical? The second frame is human resources. How do you develop the talent that you need to produce for what you want your organization to do? And next is the political frame. And politics isn't as bad as we tend to think it is. Politics really is a negotiation of relationships, and that is what relational communication is. It's about politics. So you want to know who your allies are, who are your nemesis, who can you negotiate with, and how can you negotiate with your enemies? So politics is just what we do in the world. It's going to be here as long as there are human beings here. Okay? So get used to it. The next one is the symbolic frame. Really, it's about culture. Those rituals of culture that are enduring and that last for over decades and hundreds of years. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is about frames. Now, the next frame that we'll be talking about is basically just to refer you to them, the structural and resource frames. And these frames are important to look at and to start us off. So in terms of the metaphor for organizations, for instance, a structural frame is a factory or a machine. That's a metaphor. Another metaphor for the human resource frame is family. How is an organization like a family? With the father and mother and the children. And it could be a patronizing metaphor. So maybe that metaphor isn't as effective or what we need. But it's an example. The other frames that we'll talk about are political and symbolic frames. So the political frame, for instance, a metaphor for that could be the jungle. You got to survive. It's like The Apprentice with Donald Trump. In terms of symbolic, you can think of metaphors like the carnival, where everything is kind of in a state of flux. And especially in Rio de Janeiro, where we have carnival, the poor become the kings and queens for a day, and the rich become the lowly peasants. So they switch roles. And so that's kind of a symbolic ritual that goes on with in Rio de Janeiro with the carnival and samba. So it really is interesting how carnivals turn things topsy-turvy and upside down. Okay, so we discussed what a frame is, and again, it's a tool for effectiveness. And next, what we want to talk about too is, we're going to add another frame to this, and this is what I really want to talk about too today. We're going to add a 5th frame to organizational frameworks by thinking about how rates of time affect organizations across decades and across thousands of years in the deep past and future. And that frame is called the critical deep time frame, or long-term futures frame. And certain theorists of that frame are Sarah Sharma, Paul Sappho, and Stuart Brand. And we're going to apply their work, especially that of Stuart Brand, who talks about pace layers. And the pace layers is a set of 6 pace layers. One is called fashion and art. The next is commerce. The next one is infrastructure. And the next one is called culture, or actually governance. And then after that is culture. And then after that, nature. Now, these pace layers are what help organize a society. And in a healthy society, each level is allowed to operate at its own pace, safely sustained by the lower levels below, and kept invigorated by the livelier levels above. Every form of civilization is a wise equilibrium between firm substructure and soaring liberty. And that was by the historian Eugen Rosenstock Hussey. Each layer must respect the different pace of the others. If commerce, for example, is allowed by governance and culture to push nature at a commercial pace, all supporting natural forests, fisheries, and aquifers will be lost. If governance is changed suddenly instead of gradually, you get the catastrophic French and Russian revolutions. And in the Soviet Union, the government tried to ignore the constraints of culture and nature while forcing a 5-year plan, infrastructure, pace on commerce and art. Thus, it cut itself off from both support and innovation. So the USSR was doomed. Now, all this is quoted from Stuart Brand's Clock Along Now on pages 36 and 37. And fashion moves at the fastest pace, which is followed by commerce that refers to economic and market changes. Infrastructure is the regulatory framework that undergirds fashion and commerce. And governance reflects the organizational ideology that shapes infrastructure, and that in turn is influenced by culture and religion, while nature moves at geologic and cosmic speed, with shifts occurring over millennia. So as sociocultural practices change over time, how can we anticipate and account for them? We integrate and analyze each pace layer in the context of theories of ethnography, organizational change, and relationships to introduce you to the complexity of anticipatory thinking. So long-term thinking in terms of a 10-year, 100-year, and 1,000-year time horizon can assist us in reframing organizations from the present. We will learn how to see the long term through various frames for strengthening organizational action in the present. Another question we're going to ask is, how does Brand's pace layers of change act as part of this critical deep time frame? And how do they connect to the 4 frames of viewing organizations we'll study? What is worth preserving over the long term? How can organizations preserve valuable ideas? So along with those 4 frames, we're adding the 5th frame of time and how it sustains, affects organizations, and how do we preserve great ideas over time? And what kind of organizational structures do we need that? You see, with the pace layers, at any one moment, we can take a snapshot of society and see how the pace layers are moving at different rates of time across fashion, commerce, infrastructure, governance, culture, and nature. And there's iterations of change happening between now and, say, the year 2050 or the year 2100. All these iterations are little changes that are happening in these pace layers. So it doesn't happen all at once. It happens gradually. Think of that earthquake that we're all waiting for. Well, the Earth is letting off steam by little and bigger earthquakes. Maybe we'll avoid the big one. But up until that, we're going to feel like the 4.0s and the 6.0 earthquakes until maybe we have the 8-point earthquake, God forbid. But what I'm talking about really is just those little and bigger changes that happen along the way. So the pace layers change at different rates, and all these changes are occurring. So if we take a snapshot of, say, 2014 right now, changes are occurring in technology, at Google. And over time, until like 10 years from now, 2024, we'll see Google, for instance, change as an organization, get more integrated into our lives, perhaps through Google Glasses and wearable technologies, and I'm including Apple in this, so that by 2024, these changes that are occurring right now, for instance, we'll have the iPhone 10, for example. So that's an idea of how pace layers work from now until then. Changes are happening all the time, and the pace layers are a way to take a snapshot of society at any one moment to see how these changes are occurring and how they might turn out. Okay? So that's really important. Now next, all this goes to show, with our 4 time frames and the additional frame of time, or critical time, it's all about expanding managerial thinking. So The traditional management thinking is about seeing only one or two frames, while the artistic thinking is trying to think or see holistically in multi-frame perspectives. The traditional time thinking tries to solve all problems with logic and structure, while artistic thinking has a richer palette of options. Traditional management thinking is about seeking certainty and control and avoiding ambiguity and paradox, while artistic thinking is about developing creativity, playfulness, playing with all the frames. The traditional management thinking wants one right answer, one best way, while artistic thinking is about principled flexibility and how do we use all these five frames to help us. Now, in conclusion, we want to go in looking at reframing organizations and using our 5 frames. We want to go from narrow thinking and that produces clueless managers to having multiple frames that improves understanding and promotes versatility. Multiple frames enable reframing, viewing the same thing from multiple perspectives, from structural to human resources to political to symbolic to critical time and long-term thinking. So our 5th time frame will actually be a very valuable frame that we'll be including and looking at throughout the course in viewing the other 4 frames. Okay? So I want to thank you for listening and welcome to Relational Communication in Organizations with your host, Lonnie Brooks. Oh, I forgot. I have to end this with a rap. Don't forget. The rap is very important. And you'll be hearing this rap. Reframe, reframe. Put a new spin on the mess you're in. Reframe, reframe. Try to play a different game. Reframe, reframe. When you're in a tangle, shoot another angle. Look at things a different way. Thank you very much.